I know it's been an exciting, fun-filled, and a tiring day. Yes, it's tiring as we are approaching towards the end. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Shawn, who would be taking us through It's Time to Rethink TestOps. Shawn has around 2 decades of experience of working in various capacities as product management, strategy, and product marketing. He has been associated with KPMG, Capgemini, BMC, GitHub, and is currently associated with Testamayo. He's also an alma mater of University of Texas. Shawn, I see that this is an interesting topic where we are going to hear on test operations. With a reference to your speech from speaker interview, test ops is the discipline of managing and scaling test automation to maximize efficiency, delivery, and application quality. And according to you, core of test ops lies in planning, management, control, and insights. I can't hold back my curiosity anymore. With these words, let me hand over to you, Shawn, and understand what test ops exactly is. Over to you, Shawn. Welcome on board.
Shawn, can you hear us?
Shawn,
We can see him in the participant list, Jyoti. Not sure.
yes,
Let's give him a minute.
we
Shawn,
are
you're on
not able
mute.
to hear.
Yeah, you're on mute, Shawn. Can you please unmute?
How about now?
Yes, we can
Yes,
hear you.
Okay. All right. Let me make sure that I'm using the right microphone too. I have a better microphone. Hopefully this is coming through okay.
yes.
We can hear you clear, Shawn.
Okay, great. Well, good evening and good morning to me. It's early here in Colorado. I'm in the middle of the United States and in the Denver, Colorado area where it is. It's about Celsius. It's about 5 below zero, so it's a little bit different weather than you probably have. And it's about to start our Saturday, so a little bit different than probably what's going on. So let me see if I can share my screen and we'll.
Sure. Good morning, Shawn, and I think a great way to start your Saturday and the weekend.
Hang on, it's asking me to change something and I might have to get out and get back in. I've done this before. I don't know why it's not letting me do it now.
Sure.
I might have to change privacy and come back in, but I had done this already, so.
Maybe you want to re-log in again.
Hey, I will do that in just 1 second. I just have to change a security setting.
Okay.
Okay, while we get Shawn back, Jyoti, I think you're doing a good job.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, this is our last session for the day. Audience, please hold back and we'll give Shawn a minute to figure out what's happening on his end and come back.
We have Shawn once again.
All right, I think this is going to allow me to share now, finally. All right, you're seeing a screen, I assume.
I think the other team
Yes.
for track in 2 and 3. I think it's better someone inform them. Track 2 and 3.
Yes.
Shawn, you're muted.
How about now?
Yes, we can hear you.
And you can see a full screen.
Yes, we can see the full screen.
Well, technology is pretty amazing that, we can be on the opposite sides of the world, literally, and yet have a communication, and yet we still have all these little tricks and all these challenges. So I guess it's a little bit like testing, right? You think that you have a test perfectly worked out, and something in the application just doesn't sync up with your test automation tool, and your test fails, and then you're trying to figure out what happened. So I guess that's why we have these talks and why we do things like these conferences, don't we? So let me just jump right in. So I'm Shawn Jaques. I'm Director of Product Marketing Strategy at Testom. If you haven't heard of Testom, Testom is a SaaS-based AI-powered test automation platform, and we work on any kind of web-based application. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I'll try to stick to the topic and not be too much of a marketing advertisement, as I'm sure that most people will appreciate. All right, so let's talk about what TestOps is, and we're going to talk about this a little differently, and we'll kind of explain what I will explain a little bit of some of the definitions that you might see about TestOps and what people think TestOps is. I'm giving you a little bit of a clue here in that it's a framework for scaling test automation, and I'll describe what that means. I'll give you a couple of tips for how we think about successful test automation projects, so a blueprint, if you will, that it helps lead you down the right path. And then we'll talk about some features that are good for helping people scale, and some of them are things you've probably heard of before, and some of them might be new to you. So first of all, let's talk about what is TestOps. And so a lot of people think of TestOps kind of like they think of DevOps. It's just this integration, or it's this intersection between these two different disciplines. And while that is true, that there is an intersection between testing and operations, it's also already covered by the DevOps infinity loop. If you think about the DevOps processes, we already have testing included in the infinity loop. So I think this definition is a little unuseful, I'll just say. And then you say, is it using production data in testing? Because I see some definitions out there of what TestOps is on the internet say this is what it is. It's using production and testing, and we already have we should use production-like data, or at least simulated data, but it doesn't really meet the definition of what TestOps would be. What about testing in production? Well, testing in production is actually a separate term. A lot of people think about it as feature flagging and rolling out in different increments. So it's a good technique, but I don't know that it's really a good definition. So what is a good definition of TestOps? Well, when we and I'll lead into it here in just a second. So when we think about the challenge with scaling your test automation, you start off with maybe a couple people that are in the test, they're doing the testing, a couple people that are creating tests, maybe you only have a couple hundred tests. You're releasing on an infrequent basis, but as those things start to grow, all of a sudden things start to get more complicated. Now with more people, you have different roles that you have to manage. You have different people that are coming in, and maybe they don't have the same skill set, and they don't really know how to write tests in the same way. They also don't know where reusable assets are or what the best practices are. So it just becomes a little bit more complicated. When you think about test, when you start to go from the hundreds into the thousands, now all of a sudden you need to be better organized. How are you going to name things in a way that people can find them? How are you going to organize your tests? How are you going to use labels to find them or to run them in your CI in a way that makes sense? And then just the frequency of releases as you start to, if you have multiple teams that are building, components of an application and they're releasing frequently, then the same thing, you just have more activity going, and it just makes everything more complicated. And this is the scaling problem about testing that I think a lot of people don't really factor in when they're building out their test automation plans. They think that, hey, we can write tests quickly, but when they start to get more of anything, things just get more complicated. I often use the juggling analogy. If you're juggling, throwing one ball up in the air and catching it, it's pretty simple. 2 balls is also fairly easy. 3 balls, now you're starting to, you need a skill. 4 balls, that's really tough. 5, 6, 7, things get just more complicated as you add more. So why is scaling of test automation becoming more important, or why is it that something that is becoming a bigger challenge? I think there's really these 3 cycles that are causing things to grow. First of all, there's the growth in web applications. As you all are aware, everybody has a web application. And then there's even things like progressive web applications, which allow people to build the application for your website and then have it be almost as functional as a dedicated mobile app, a native mobile app. And so, why build 2 things when you can build one? So there's just a massive growth there. I would say that test automation is also getting easier. There's a lot of vendor-based tools like ours that have gained parity, functional parity with the open source frameworks, and in fact made a lot of the testing easier. So not requiring coding, but to be able to do things within the tool, for instance, that you never used to be able to do before. So it makes adoption easier. And then lastly, it's this faster release cycle. So in order to keep up with all of the changes that are happening in your application, you just can't afford to spend a lot of time writing a test, whether that's a test in code or just a manual test, and to test in a manual way on a regression on each release. It's too slow when you really get down to that. So I know this group is playing well into the automation, so it's not a new thing here, but I think it's just a combination of different things that's causing this new demand for automation. So when I think about TestOps, I like to break it apart again and say, well, it's the operations of testing. Because testing is becoming such a big and important part of these larger agile teams, it means that you need to manage the testing just like you would manage any other discipline. You have to have processes and controls, and you have to be able to get insights out of the data that you're building. So I consider it the discipline of managing and scaling your test automation to maximize efficiency, delivery, speed, and application quality. So the efficiency part is something that comes in. Sure, you could, as you're building out more tests and you have, more people on your team and you have more releases, you could always add more people to manage the quality process. But that then, takes away from the gains that you're getting in the automation side. So the key here is to do it as efficiently as possible. So as you are adding more of those things, that that you have the tools, you have the ability to keep scaling at an efficient rate without adding more people. All right, so we'll jump into each one of these things, these aspects of TestOps. The first one I'll talk about is the planning aspect. So, there's a question? No. The first one is planning, and so in planning, you have to decide what are you going to test, how are you going to test it, and who should be doing the testing. And we often refer to the test pyramid or test triangle to think about how to allocate your tests. Are you going to do unit testing or integration testing or end-to-end testing? You might think of what to test. It might be a risk-based approach, or it might be based on a new feature that you're building. And whatever your processes are, there's lots of techniques and lots of strategies there. But one of the things that you should do is have good documentation, and there are different tools that you can use to help document the various components. So if you're going to what is your test strategy? How do you document that? How do you document the test cases? The procedures that you're going to use through them? What are the pass-fail criteria, the acceptance criteria? What test data are you going to use? And what tests are related? So this is all kind of in the planning phase, and when you're doing this in an effective way, it just makes the growth with all that extra complexity a little bit easier. The next one is management. So, more things means that you have more friction, if you will. So, if you have lots of tests, just trying to find that test. If I just relate to, a simple example, when I'm trying to find that document that I wrote, 2 months ago, where is that document, or where is that, and I can do a search for it. And I think I know what I named it, but it's kind of hard to remember. And so you might get, a list of things that sound the same or look the same, but they're not exactly the right one, and then you have to dive into it and find it, and that just lowers productivity. So the more that you can organize things in ways and give people the ability to search and find things, or to go into the right folder to find the right test. If you have structure that says these folders are going to be used for for features, and maybe you're going to use something else like labels for the release types, and you're going to use suites, and you have a consistent structure, and there's plenty of different ways that you can structure that makes sense. It's just having something that the whole team understands and is well documented really helps that piece of it. And the other part is work assignments. So understanding who on the team is actually doing what test, so confusion with what part of the application you're responsible for and who owns a particular test. Not only does it help with the getting the work done, it also helps with the aspect of troubleshooting. How do you know who to go call when a test fails? It always helps, if you have some ownership to the tests. The next one is the test lifecycle. So people don't think about lifecycle too often, but a test has, you write the test. It has a life where it's useful and being executed. Sometimes that test might not be working as intended, so you have to put it into maybe a quarantine status and think of it. So it's almost like it runs through its own pipeline. And some, large companies will build their own separate pipelines for making changes to tests. And some of that stuff can be done within a tool itself. So to really follow that test through its life cycle, to understand this is a well-functioning test that that already is proven to work, and if it's failing, then let's move it into a different state and evaluate it and make sure. And then lastly is, how do I manage test execution? How do I do that in a way that isn't taking up all my time? And some of that is by scheduling certain tests, by running some tests in your CI on as project gates, etc. I'm going to save that question. What matters most? I got a question, so I'm just going to take a quick second and stop and read it. What matters most? TestOps shift left, continuous testing practice, or TestOps shift right, focusing on the collaboration with the operations team, or both? It's a good question. A lot of these questions are organizational dependent, I think. So, it depends on. I certainly think shifting left is really important when it comes to increasing the speed of your releases. So, the more of the tests that you can shift earlier in the process, the earlier you can test, the faster you're going to catch bugs, the quicker the feedback you're going to get, and then that whole cycle of innovation that is necessary, that is driven based on release, get feedback, adjust, release, get feedback, adjust, is dependent on the ability to identify problems early and to fix them as quickly as possible. So to me, that's a key thing there. Focusing on collaboration with the operations team, I think is also important, but less so. I think that there are already people in a lot of the DevOps processes that is their job, is to ensure that there's consistent deployment and configuration from development processes through test and into production. So I think a lot of that stuff gets handled pretty well. I'm going to move on to the next question here, or the next section. So control. So if you think of tests as critical high quality assets that you also need to take care of, you should also think that, I need control of them. And I think this gets more important when you get larger. So you have a larger team and there's different skills on this team. Some might be developers who only write tests when they're building a certain feature, and there are other people who write tests and understand testing and really think about testing all the time, and they're experts in that. And they have different skills and different ways of thinking about it, and you need to be able to set standards and drive reuse of those well-created assets. And you also need to think about how do we approve changes to some of these tests and to these assets. So, that could be, treating them like code. You run them through the same pull request process that you do with your code, or you require reviews. So those kind of processes that help people, ensure that the code is being reviewed. It's of high quality. And then lastly, insights. You should be able to get insights out of your test data. So not just whether something passed or failed, but is it helping me to improve the process overall? So am I able to get data from that process and identify, hey, we have this problem. A lot of our failing tests are because the environment is a little unstable. Well, if we work on fixing the environment, then we can fix a lot of the problems. And that sounds like something that, will save us time in the long run. So let's go spend time on it. It's like if you have a car and the car keeps losing, your tire keeps losing air. If you were to replace the tire instead of just keep pumping it up, you'll be better off in the long run. It's a similar type idea, is how do I get the data that will help me really, evolve this process so I can be more efficient with the testing. Let me just stop for 1 second.
Do you want to take up the question, or you want to complete the part 3?
Yeah, I think I'll keep going through this one. Yeah. So I'll just say that we like to think of a blueprint for success. So there's a lot of data on this slide, but we have a customer success team at our Testum company, and when we start any project, some of the things that we've found are key to the success of the project is how well they set it up and some of the structure that they put in place. So in addition to having a team or being able to have some of these other planning, management, control, and insights, it's also important to think about the process of building your project and growing your project. So, it starts with a support structure. So a strong champion, you want your management engaged on this process. Communication is a word that gets thrown around a lot, but when I think of communication from a project perspective, it means making sure that you've established what is the cadence that you're going to be talking, or you're going to be reporting out the success. How are you going to communicate the growth of your test automation project in a way that causes other people to say, hey, that's working. I want to understand more about it, or maybe get involved with it. And then infrastructure readiness. When your infrastructure is not quite ready, you're going to have problems, and there's those systemic things that need to be fixed in order to set you up for success. So when we come into it, often you have a plan phase where you're establishing the goals and objectives. What are the coverage expectations? What are the areas we're going to start on, and what are we going to move to next? How are we going to evaluate the team skills so that we know, where we want to put in our review, or required reviews, or how we want to train people or educate people, and then have a kickoff that is something that includes the stakeholders, includes the champion, something that shows that there's some organizational support here, and that is often key to getting it off on the right foot. And then once you get going, you have to prove the value of your project. You have to demonstrate that, your team is delivering value, that you are, you're building automation that is sustainable. So you want to create reusable functions. You want to drive some stability in those tests. and ideally integrate that with your CI. You just heard about some of this, and I think it's one of the keys, because when it becomes part of the CI, when you truly trust those tests and they can fit into that CI, then it's really it becomes part of that DevOps process, and people want to continually improve it. And then lastly, as you scale, you want those change controls. Is it a pull request? Is it a required review on any changes? What are those steps that you expect people to follow in order to make sure that a change is a proper change? And then measure and report. So if that's a weekly report, if that's a monthly report, make sure that you stick to that cadence and that you have that you're providing data to everyone. So because Testum is a test automation tool, we have some things I can show you. We start with a dashboard. And a dashboard is really nice because it gives you a way to kind of see what's important at a glance. So you might see how did my test runs from yesterday do? How what are the activities in my account? What are some of the pending or changed requests? And the ability to filter this not just by everything in a project, but to filter things that are just related to me, allows somebody like a developer who doesn't use the tool very often to come in and say, oh wow, these are the pull requests that are open for me. These are the 3 tests that I have to work on. It just makes your workload a little bit simpler. When I talk about management, there's lots of ways that you can organize things. You can use folders, you can use suites, you can use labels. Having a good structure for those things is important. Owner is something that not everybody thinks about, but I think it's really important that you know who to go find if a test doesn't work, and it's perhaps not quite as easy to debug as you might think. And then status. So status here. So I mentioned this as a life cycle piece of it, but status can be more than just a label or a tag. So there are large companies like Netflix that will build entire separate processes for how they control their tests, and they run them through their pipeline, and they make sure that they're all stable before they will actually make them active and actually control on whether something gets released or not. And we built some of that stuff into our tool so that if you run something in draft status, it doesn't run in the CI. If you run it in evaluating status, it will run in the CI, but it won't fail the CI build if it fails. So it's allowing you to get information about whether a test is running properly or not, but not stopping your build process. And then once you turn it to active, it actually will, it will run it, and if it fails, then it will actually fail the build, which is what you want. And then when you get into a quarantine status, you're actually moving it out, and you're getting into the next thing. Controlling changes, I mentioned, some things that might be useful, whether that's you could be using a Git process for code, and there's lots of things like pull requests and required reviews, and I used to work at GitHub, so I'm a little bit familiar with those things, but we built some of those things into our tests. We are a low-code product. And then lastly, when you think about insights, it's more than just the plus, did something pass, did something fail? It's about, how do I really understand what happened? So, being able to tag the failures by, what type of failure? Was it a bug? Was it an environment? Was it a network problem? And then look at that data over time, trend that data, understand, are there certain things that I can fix systemically that will make a bigger difference and help me not keep, trying to fix the same problems. And then, bigger teams are likely to have lots of overlap. So, are you writing tests that are overlapping other tests? And are you, if so, is there a way to make that a little bit more efficient? Can you identify those duplicates? Kind of like refactoring your code. Can you find all the pieces that are duplicate? Can you write a method and call that method instead of running that same thing over and over again? That just helps with maintenance. When you have to fix a test, If it's part of a reusable group instead of a separate standalone thing, you only have to fix it one time and it fixes all those dependent tests. And then the last one on here is team productivity. So, the ability to understand what your team is doing. Who are the people that are updating tests or creating tests. I mean, if they're creating tests aren't very high and they're making a lot of updates, then maybe their tests aren't as stable and maybe they need a little training. So all these are just kind of management tools that can help you think about, how do I grow more efficiently? Where do I need to spend time as a manager to focus a little bit more efficiently? So that was it. We talked about TestOps. Just thinking about it differently is how do we scale our operations? How do we grow management, planning, management, control, and insights? It's not a subject. It's a substitute for good project management, but it's a set of capabilities to think about when you're building out your project at scale. And again, look for features when you're thinking about products, whether that's an open source product and what add-ons you need with that. How does that help me scale my tests and my team in a more efficient way? All right. So with that, I think I'll take some questions or look at some of these questions.
Yes, we do have a few questions. One question you have already answered. Maybe we can take the second question which we have. The question is, how can we have a right sense of understanding and alignment within product development or engineering teams for TestOps to avoid any confusion related to overall process involved in TestOps?
I'm sorry, I was reading a different question at the same time.
This is the second question.
Okay, can you ask that again, please?
How can we have a right sense of understanding and alignment within product development or engineering teams for TestOps to avoid any confusion related to the overall process involved in TestOps?
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I recently talked to one of our customers, and they what they have is they have about a dozen or so agile teams in their company, and every one of them has a QA person. So there's a bunch of QA people. There's a product owner, a QA person. 4 to 6 developers per agile team is the way they're organized, and then there's an overlay like a practice lead. This practice lead is responsible for all of these, best practices that everybody who's involved. And so not only do the QA write tests, the developers on these agile teams write tests, but in order to keep things consistent from agile team to agile team, they have like an infrastructure best practice team that will set up standards, and they'll identify, here are some reusable components that have been vetted that are solid, that you can use in your tests. And here is the structure for creating a test and for naming tests, and basically setting up all of that those processes and controls at that level, allowing each one of the teams to to follow it, still giving them autonomy within each team to decide how they want to test. So they might say, I'm going to write automation for 50%, and I'm going to use manual or exploratory testing for the other 50% of my coverage. They have that flexibility, but they also have guidelines. They have guardrails on the bowling lane, if you will.
Okay, with that, I guess Rituraj, you have got the answer. Moving to our next question. The question is, based on your experience with TestOps so far, what is the most challenging thing with which teams struggle the most, and why? How to fix the same?
Yeah, that one's tough because I see people struggling in a number of different areas. I'll just say that a couple of things that I patterns I'll say are certainly in organizing their tests. So do I put tests in folders? Do I use labels? Do I use suites? How do I organize things? And what we've seen there is and it's also a little bit of naming. So if you're using a process like Jira and you have your user story in Jira, using a name in your test that relates to that JIRA issue sometimes is a good practice for then, you can see that test result and it goes back to the JIRA issue, and you can kind of close that loop. So there are some little tips or tricks that people use, but some people, I think that, organizing features in folders, using suites to for what phase of the test is, whether it's a regression test or a smoke test or a sanity test or something like that, and then using labels in ways that just fit your team the best. So, and one more thing that I will say is the other thing people have been challenged is, how do I really feel that this test is ready to run in my CI? And that's one of those reasons that we came out with that status thing, and why big companies have separate processes that are essentially treating their tests as code and running them through the similar kind of evaluation process. And that is, you run your test as an evaluating state until you feel comfortable that it is truly delivering, if it's a positive result, if it's a true positive, it's not a false positive when it fails. And so when you feel comfortable that your test is doing what your test is supposed to be doing, you're more likely to want to run it in your CI. And giving them somebody the ability to evaluate that test a couple runs before you start affecting the build just means that people aren't going to feel like, oh, you crashed my build, you must not know how to write a good test, or the test is flaky. Everybody has more confidence in the process that way. That's been a good win.
Thank you. I can't agree. I agree on both of these points, but again, I also feel that process is one of the place where we have challenges, and this is with my own personal experience. Adherence to processes where we face the highest number of challenges, wherein we bring in change control boards so that the processes are quite smooth in TestOps area specifically. With that, maybe we can move to the next question, which is whether TestSec perform ops similar to DevSec perform ops is also coming its way.
I don't know what this one is. These things come up all the time. I used to work at a company called BMC Software, and we were like, we took DevOps and we put Sec in the middle of it, and it became DevSecOps, and then it was SecOps, and I don't know, like on some of these things, I think it's just inserting marketing into a term to add more emphasis to it. For the most part, I think it's, the DevOps process, if you think about the infinity loop, I'll probably get this wrong, but you have your requirements, you do your planning, you do your coding, you do your testing, you deploy to production, you monitor it, you evaluate results, and you come back into this loop, right? So this continual DevOps loop has been pretty well accepted and received, and it covers so many of these things if you look at all the underlying processes. And just because testing is in this little section of the loop, of the infinity loop, doesn't mean it's the only place that you do testing. You can certainly do, you can run your tests in production to monitor, that they're still working. You can, you should certainly be part of planning. You should be part of the requirements process. All those things are just, adding some refinement to that loop in my mind. So hopefully that's a good non-answer.
All right. So maybe what we can consider that security and performance can still be said as part of testing itself, and we can still keep it simple, like test ops only, right?
Yeah, you can certainly expand your idea of what falls under the testing operations management, so does that mean that performance testing and security testing are also in there? I've talked only about functional or UI testing in this presentation, and yes, that's because I have my blinders on. I'm a little bit focused on that area and myself, but absolutely you could expand that to say, well, what about our security tests? What control processes do we have there? So that's, I think the framework still holds, right? You plan, you have management tools that will help you organize your security tests. You have you can have controls for how you how you approve new security tests, and you can have insights that you get out of your security tests. I think all those things still hold true as a framework, and then it's up to you and your team to think about, how do I pull in those other kinds of tests into a framework like that?
Exactly. Moving to our next question. Does TestOps also help get more control on traceability and coverage?
So does TestOps help me? Well, so I would say that TestOps is focused on AI-powered UI testing. So if it's a web-based application, we do we'll test it. And so the things that we focused on initially as a company have been fast authoring. So you can record a test, you can configure it really quickly in the UI, add validations or assertions, you can make groups, you can reuse those groups, all these kind of things that make it just really easy to create and configure a test. You can also add code wherever you want to truly make it more flexible.
Yeah, sure. So I have two last questions. These questions are from my end. The first question from my end is,
Can I Jyoti request Shawn to take it little later, because I think everybody is waiting. We are shooting the time, Jyoti.
I
I
know,
think it was one of the most wonderful sessions we had, and Shawn, thank you so much. The entire audience is here. We have got around 150 plus. In fact, if you look at the total attendance right at this time, it is close to 175 odd people who are basically appreciating what we have achieved today. Thank you so much for your time. Jyoti, can we have you basically post your queries to Shawn? Shawn, would that be okay? Can we do a hard stop here? Because a lot of people are basically reaching out to me and saying that, Adi, can you release the contest results? So contest has been going all day through, and I have got at least 20 requests in last 3 minutes. So that's the reason I just came here, Jyoti. Sorry about
yeah, that's
making
fine. I know we have already passed like 9 minutes this session.
Yeah.
So I understand. Once again, thank you, Shawn. It was wonderful connect with you. The idea itself is really nice, and it is thought provoking for us. Thank you very much.